Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech, protected.
The following is independently produced programming. The views and opinions expressed are those of the producers and do not reflect the views and opinions of Falls Area Community Television, our staff, or board of directors.
Secrets in the shadows, lost and found. Truth in every echo, loud and clear. Keep on with the long road, no more fear. In the halls of power, whispers grow. Every secret cracked beneath the undertone. Honest stories hidden in the glass. On this long road, in the truth we trust.
Hello, welcome to The Long Road. My name is Chris Roberts. We're here today to discuss some finances, a cost of living, affordability. Of course, the president says the affordability is just a made-up word. It's just a woke word. Affordability is really no big deal. He even says he doesn't care about the economy and whether people can afford. Hey, price of gas is just, you know what? Just a minor thing worth making sure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. But hey, we could pay all this and Iran could buy a nuclear weapon off North Korea, and then what do we do then? So, there's a trick that government likes to play. They'll go and say, look at the GDP. The GDP is really good. It's increasing. Look at the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is really low. It's about 4%. Sometimes it ticks up, sometimes it ticks down. And it goes and says, oh, we created 120,000 jobs this year. Okay? But it doesn't tell you you need like 135,000 jobs to keep up with growth and people coming of age to be able to work. Okay? The government says, hey, GDP. But what does GDP really mean to most Americans? It's a nice number for economists. It's a nice number for politicians. But it doesn't put food on your table, doesn't put gas in your car, or pay for a bunch of things that you really need. Okay, what is unemployment? Oh, unemployment is 4%. Well, and we're over here where the official unemployment is $7.2 million. 7.2 million people. But the actual unemployment is 13.7 million people. Where did that 6.5 million people who are unemployed go? Well, once your unemployment money runs out, or if you're not actively seeking a job, you don't count. The unemployed people are the people who are collecting unemployment and actively looking for a job. So if you've been collecting unemployment, you've been looking for a job, and you haven't found a job in 9 months, you're no longer a statistic, you disappear. So we can say, oh, the actual unemployment, he goes and says, well, the official unemployment may be 4%, but when we put all these numbers in there, these other people, the real unemployment rate could be 7%. Okay? And like the trick they play, let's say the Boston Celtics. So the Boston Celtics, 4 of their starting 5 people get $5 million a year. Their superstar gets $40 million a year. Okay? So the Boston Celtics come out and say, we have a payroll budget of $60 million. So people go $60 million divided by 5. So the average salary on the Boston Celtics is $12 million per person. But if we're looking at that, $12 million per person, those other 4 guys are only getting $5 million. Bingo, you're talking about their average is about 130% higher than what they're getting. And that's what the government likes to do. They want to put it in a big number. And why does that make a big difference? Do you know 60% of the people in the United States only consume 22.1% of all the products? 60%, 22.1 products. And so really, if I'm a manufacturer and things like that, or I'm selling things, it's like, why waste my time with the bottom 60? There's really not much profit to be made from these people. They're not buying houses, they're not buying cars, they're not buying stock, things like that. Oh, these are Walmart people. These are the Dollar Tree, the dollar store, those type of people. You know what? Yeah. So again, not much money to be made off them. Well, this group, this 60%, their wages haven't been going up very much at all. And it's like, here's the number. The bottom 60% of the people, their average increase between 2001 and 2023 is 0.37 per year. Just think of it, 0.37 per year. So look at it. For every $10,000 they had, and you look at that, so if they had $10,000 in 2001, when they started 2002, they had $10,370. And it kept going and going. So the average was 0.37 over a 22-year period. Now, the rest of the people, the top 40%, their increase was a little bit more than 1% a year. And so what is happening was the people in the top 40%, their income increased almost 3 times as much per year as the bottom 60%. Now, the top 5%, they have almost increased 1.25% per year. So like if you go in and so the bottom 30%, they increased about 7.5% over a 22-year period. The top 40, they increased about 22% over that 22 year. The top 5, they increased over 25% over that 22-year period. So they have more money. Again, the bottom 60, okay? So how did the bottom 60 survive? Well, when you had companies like Walmart and McDonald's pay low wages to maximize their profits, then the federal government and the taxpayers then go in and give the people on the bottom 60, okay, you get food stamps, you get free and reduced lunch, you get Medicaid, you get health care for your children, okay? And really, for a lot of people, they would like to have a good paying job that pays benefits and gives them the opportunity to save for retirement, like the top 40%. There is such a big divide between the bottom 60% and the top 40%. And you would go, it comes to a point is, for business, the economy doesn't care about the bottom 60%. Politicians talk about income equality and things like that, but they don't care. That's talk. They don't want to do anything because we don't want to require companies to have to pay out these benefits that could affect their profits, but we'll put all this on the federal government's dime. Okay? And so it goes, like when Mitt Romney was running for president, he goes, well, 47% of the people in the United States don't pay taxes. Well, of that, quote, 47%, over 70% of those, they work. But they may be getting minimum wage, or they may be getting a little bit over. So if they're working full time, or even both people in the household working full time, and they have 2 kids, when they go and take this standard deduction and everything, they don't have any income to declare. That's why, quote unquote, they're not paying income tax. They're paying into Social Security, they're paying into Medicare, but they're making so little amount of money, they're going to get very little out of Social Security when they turn 67. So when we go through, we look at 2001 to 2023. In that 22-year period, the cost of basic living in the United States went up 99.5%. So the cost of living, if you $25,000 just covered the bare minimum, a place to sleep out of the cold, cover your utilities, and get food. Or if you don't make that and the federal government is giving you utility money, it's giving you free and reduced lunch, it's giving you Medicare, and giving you subsidized housing, bingo, you got that, you have stability. But between 2001 and 2023, if it was costing $25,000, then plus all the government subsidies, which on an average was $14,000 to $19,000 per household, depending where you lived and everything. Well, that was going to cost in 2023 now $50,000, and it's still costing 14 to 19% that has to be covered by the federal government or the state government paying part. Okay? House, you want to buy a new house? It increased 130%. So just think, a house that where you live may have been $250,000, pretty reasonable and everything. So in 2001, that's a really nice house. But in 2023, that house would cost about $600,000. So So the people in the bottom 60 cannot afford a house. Okay, if I'm building houses, I'm not building a small house for these people to live in because I'm not making a lot of money. Okay, healthcare. Healthcare went up by 178% in there. So you got Medicaid, which is coming out of the federal and state government, coming out of people's taxes. Okay? And because they can't make the money they would like to do on Medicaid, they order a whole bunch of different tests to be able to get extra money. But the insurance companies want to make max profit. Hospitals, even if they're nonprofit, want to make money. So how do they make money? Insurance companies charge businesses and public entities more money for healthcare, to cover healthcare. So you might have a family in the school district and you have to pay $26,000 to cover that family. Oh, there's your taxes go up. And sometimes the yearly rate is going up 10%. Okay, so if you're paying $20,000, then all of a sudden, you got to pay $22,000 for every family? You know, even if you wanted to go to an in-state college, so you live in New Hampshire and you want to go to King State or UNH, okay, that went up 122%, more than doubled. And you go, if it's $10,000 there, and now it's about $23,000. What's the difference? Do you get a better product, better outcome? But what was the justification for going up? And so you look at the thing and it's like, why is everything going up? Okay, who can afford this? Who can afford a house? Okay, now when you look at the top 40%, and then you realize, oh, look what the top 5% made. And then you look down, and really basically, it's only the people in the top 20% that makes a difference. And do you know the top 10% of the income earners in the United States is going to consume 45% of all the commodities that were sold this year? 45%. The bottom 60 are going to consume a less than 21%. I mean, less than 20%. So if you round it off, 70% of the people, so if I put the top 10 and then the bottom 60, I can say that 70% of the people in the United States will consume 65% of the commodities in the United States this year. Oh, so it doesn't look too bad at all, does it? But that's how government likes to play with numbers. That's how politicians like to play with numbers, where the bottom 60% consumes less than 20%, not by choice, but they're limited. They don't have the money. They have to go in debt. And if they're using a credit card, they may have, because they may have a low credit score, they may be paying 30%. Like I said earlier, J.C. Penney's charges 33.5%. And this is for a person who has over an 800 credit score. And where do people go? Okay, I've seen people that in Walmart, seen people in Mr. G's, seen people in Dollar Tree store that a couple of years ago, they would, as far as they were concerned, they would say, that's below my dignity to go into places like that. Well, now they can't afford places like Macy's and other places, J. Jill, other places that they would used to do or order online. You know, why is this happening? For the bottom 60% of the people, wages haven't increased at all. The bottom 60%, very few are in unions, but most of them not in unions. Like I said, Walmart, Dollar Tree, fast food joints, the whole works. Okay, they don't get paid very much. Inflation, okay, inflation was like 3.8%. Was it 2.7 the month before, 3.8? And they're talking about inflation could come in as high as 6% this year. Okay, they're projecting Social Security right now based 3.8% increase. Okay, but they're also projecting Medicare to go up, so people won't, and there's a good chance a lot of people will not see any change in the Social Security check because of Medicare costs. So if inflation, for example, was 4%, okay, and you had $40,000 a year, you lost $1,600 in buying power. Okay, what are you going to give up now? What effect will it have on your quality of life? Does it knock you down a step? And so if we do 20, 45, so that's 65. So number 11 to 40, that group kind of in the middle, the remainder of the middle class, because in the top 20, when you get in the top 20, you're in the upper middle class. And a lot of people in the upper middle class don't consider them rich or wealthy or ever. They kind of go in, oh yeah, we're just making it by. You don't know what it's like to have to do a car payment on 2 cars at $700-800 a month. You don't know what it's like to put a mortgage, pay a mortgage on an $800,000 house. You don't know what it's like to have to pay for these vacations and everything. When you get the bottom in the 60s, I can't even afford to dream about that. But the people basically from the 20 to 40, as the inflation's coming up, as property tax go up, as utilities goes up, they are getting closer and closer into slipping into that 60. Right now they consume this 30% of the people consume about 35% of the commodities sold in the country, and that number of what they consume is shrinking. And it's not increasing the bottom 60%, it's the increase is coming in the top 10%. And so you might get the bottom, quote unquote, it may go into the bottom 70% may consume 25%. So the people in the United States, they're fighting for their survival. An affordability crisis is not a woke term. Affordability is reality. Affordability, when you go in, I can't buy fresh bread. I have to buy day-old bread. I can't buy this. I have to go to Mr. G's and buy stuff that's dented or stuff that's out of Best Buy date. Or I'd have to go to Mr. G's and buy out-of-date cheap cereal, maybe $1 a box or $2 a box, so I can feed my kids breakfast. And so, and a lot of people have too much pride. They don't want to let anybody know. Okay? You want to know how I know a lot of people here don't have pride? They have too much pride? Go to the food kitchen and you go, wow, man, that place is packed. Old people, young people, kids, because that's the only way they can go to afford a meal. They're not going out to restaurants and stuff. They're fighting to survive. And here's another thing. The United States government has a $39.2 trillion debt. In about 5 months, that is going to be $40 trillion. If they get $200 billion for the war, that 40 trillion is going to come much quicker. Okay, the federal government is paying a little bit more than $1 trillion in interest. So basically, 14 to 15 cents out of every dollar that we spend, the federal government spends, goes just to pay the interest on the debt. Okay, the president is talking about, oh, we got to lower the Fed rate. You know what? The Fed rate isn't going to play much of a difference. Okay, even if you lower the Fed rate by 1%, so now instead of paying 30% on your credit card, you pay 29% on your credit card. They're still making all kinds of money. Okay, so I went and looked back. The United States sells a lot of 10-year bonds. Okay, the interest rate on the bond fluctuates because if I'm buying a 10-year bond, I'm trying to say, okay, this is what I think the interest is the inflation is going to be over the 10 years, and I need to get an interest rate that I can feel really comfortable to make money. So the federal government will go and say, hey, I got this 10-year bond and I'm going to auction it off. I need 10-year, $100,000. So they go in, bang, 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 and they look at it, and the federal government wants to get the lowest bid. So I looked at a 10-year bond in 2016, 10 years ago. So the bond is maturing this year, 2026. So in 2016, the lowest price on a 10-year bond was 1.37%, and the highest was 2.44. Not bad. So, hey, the government gets its $100,000 in cash to help pay for its programs, cover the debt, and only has to, on some of the ones, they only have to pay 1.37% a year over the year, and other one 2.44. Okay, I looked at the bond rate on the 10-year bond today before I came. So if the federal government has a $100,000 bond, 10-year bond, and was paying 1.37%, it was never paying off the bond. It was paying the owner of that bond 1.37%. And what they were doing was they were taking the money. So in 2017, they gave another bond for $100,000. Then part of that $100,000 would pay to cover the 2016. So the federal government was never ever paying off its deficit, and it was only increasing it. So they were, like when Citibank says, you know what? Your line of credit is $25,000. You know what? You owe $10,000 on this. And so this is what we'll do. We will allow you to take $10,000 of your line of credit on your credit card, pay off that higher interest credit card. We'll only charge you $500 for the transaction, and you don't have to pay any interest for a year. And then this is what your interest rate's going to be. So, quote unquote, you paid off this money over here, but you haven't changed your balance. But if you don't do anything at the end of the year, there's a good chance you're paying it on at a higher rate. And so your debt actually goes up, especially if you're just paying the minimum amount required, because the minimum amount required basically will never pay anything off. So it's like looking at your credit card and saying, oh, you got $10,000. If you pay the minimum, it will only take you 18 years to pay it off, because we're going to constantly keep lowering the minimum so we can max them out. So when the federal government now has these 10-year bonds that it's only paying 1.37% on, the 10-year bond gets cashed in. Now the government has to reissue a new bond for next 10 years. Well, while it was only paying 1.37, now you have to pay, the federal government has to pay 4.56%. Almost 3 times as much. And it's like, wait a minute. if we had these low interest rates, that's when the politicians said, both at the state level, the federal level, and the local level, they went and said, oh, these interest rates, 0.5%, 1.5%. Hey, let's go. We can do this, we could do that. Let's bond this. Let's spend, because these interest rates are so low, we're going to do it. We're even going to bond stuff that we don't even need, but it's going to be nice to have. Okay, we would like these special trees, or we'd like these special lamps because they look good and we can claim we're a green city or a green state. But what's the benefit of it? What's the cost of it? How is to maintain it? So no. So we have local governments, we have state governments, and we had federal governments who keep rolling over bonds to pay bonds that are becoming due. So you never get out of that trap. So how bad is the trap? What is the long-term solution? Okay. If you read history, read economics and stuff, there is really two solutions. Well, three. Spend less money. Okay? So yeah, you can do away with, well, cut the number of people on food stamps. Cut the number of people on Medicaid. Cut the number of people on free and reduced lunches. Cut the number of people who get a reduced pass on public transportation. So there's a whole bunch of public service things that you can cut. Bingo. We can go like Greece did when they were way over. Second, you can raise taxes. You can be like George Bush, who said, read my lips, no new taxes. But when he looked at the numbers and everything, he says, I'm sorry, but we have to raise taxes for the good of the nation. And Bill Clinton gets a lot of credit for running surpluses, but he followed on to what George Bush Sr. was doing. So between George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton, we came into surpluses. Okay? And the surplus is, the way the federal government is, a budget surplus. Okay, yes, but it doesn't mean you're reducing your debt because the interest was added on. So if you have a budget surplus of $100 billion, but the debt interest was $200 billion, so you pay $100 billion to pay off some of those bonds, but your overall deficit or debt, federal debt long term, will actually go up. But what's happening with Bill Clinton was we got a surplus, so we weren't doing outside spending to increase the debt. The other way, and the most realistic way, you have to go high inflation. Okay, why? So if the debt right now is 39.2%, so if we run inflation at 10%, we devalue the debt by 4 trillion. And then we do a couple more years at 10%. So all of a sudden, we do this for 5 years. While we may not have paid us, so we raise some taxes, we cut services, so we have a balanced budget, and we allow inflation to go 10%. Over 5 years, the value of our national debt would be devalued by $15 trillion. You go, wait a minute, the federal government would not do that. That doesn't make sense. Okay, in 1977, inflation ran between 5.5% and 6.7%. We're still coming out of the Vietnam War and some of those. Okay, then came OPEC was saying, hey, we're not going to produce all this. Then the United States gave all these weapons to Israel, and OPEC says, no more oil to the United States. The Arab oil embargo. 1978, inflation 9 to 10%. Okay. 1980, inflation between 12 and 13.3%. 1981, inflation ran between 12.5 and 18%. Yep, I remember that. You can get car loans at 24, mortgages were 19, 20%. I remember buying a brand new Volkswagen, and I thought I was really getting a real good deal because I got a special interest rate of 16.44 on it. And then later, next year, it came down to between 8.9 and 12%. So in a 4-year period, basically, inflation had a low of 8.9 and a high of 8%, 18%. You know, a couple of years ago when we were complaining, inflation was like 9.2 and Social Security gave an 8.7 and a 5.8 increase. Those were nothing compared to 77 to 82. And what was one of the leading causes of it? Energy problems. Almost the same thing that we have today. Oil is not coming out. Prices are going through the roof. Luckily, we don't have odd, even, depending on what your license plate was. You were only limited to a 5-gallon can. Those, but a lot of people were really hurting. Try living on an 18% mortgage. Okay? Try paying 24% for a new car. Try going in, it's like, holy crap, I better buy milk today because next week it may be higher. The prices were always going up. Okay? The oil, the energy oil pump, the two Fed chairmen at that time, Arthur Burns and Sherman, I can't pronounce his last name. Arthur said one of the major concerns and causes of this high interest rate was lack of government discipline when it came to budgeting. Big beautiful bill. You're running between 1.5 to $2 trillion debt per year. That's adding on. That's a lot of loss of, there is no discipline. The other one, Sherman, says major government debt. So in the 79 to 82 period, 78, 82 period, the two different chairman, of the Fed, chairman of the Fed, said energy prices and the lack of discipline in government budgeting, lack of, you got energy pricing and increasing government debt. And we're talking increased government debt. Do you know what the government debt was back then? Government debt on September 30th, 1978 was $780 billion. $780 billion. So we rounded off to $800 billion, and that and energy prices was causing major problems. So how'd the government do? The government went into allowed major inflation, brought the government bill down, okay? And then government, Reagan and some other ones changed a bunch of rules. And then we had the housing crisis. We had companies were saying this and they didn't have money. In the 2000, we had the dot-com bubble and stuff. So how did the Fed say, how are we going to fix this? So the Fed fixed it by lowering the interest rate, the Fed rate, to 0.25. So people were making millions and hundreds of millions and billions. Well, about 90% of the Americans were getting screwed. When I went to school, we had school savings and the bank rate was 5%. For a long time, you could get 5-6%. When the high inflation, you could get a CD for 12%, some are higher. So your retirement fund grew, all this. So what they did was, we have to help the government. We lowered the interest rate so low. And oh yeah, by the way, you're going to get 0.01 interest on your savings. Okay, you're going to get hardly nothing on your retirement, the CDs and stuff. You might get 0.5. But the federal government, the Fed kept it low, but the government kept borrowing and borrowing. The government kept going to wars. It didn't matter it was Democrat or Republican. The politicians would spend. And then we got COVID. Then they go, oh yeah, let's just throw all this money, trillions of dollars for stuff. Okay, quit your job. And I used to joke, I'm going, wait a minute. Can't you lay me off? Because if you lay me off, I'll make more money a week being laid off, collecting COVID money, than I am working. And people are getting money everywhere. People work in prisons, you name it. People that weren't even in the country. Bingo. There was so much fraud in everything. The government was just throwing money. School districts were blowing it. State were blowing it. Everybody was basically blowing the money because it wasn't their money. And the debt just kept going higher and higher and higher. When COVID was over, we didn't roll back to what our normal budget was. So here it is, spend, 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 but then it's not, it's still not good enough. So the Fed bought about $8 trillion of government bonds at a much lower rate to help out the government. But now they're going is, are these bonds going to have to go up to 6%, 7% to get people to other countries and other corporations and retirement funds and investment funds, insurance funds to park their money? Well, if the government is going to allow inflation to go higher to devalue, who suffers? The bottom 80% of the people will suffer. The 20 to the 40, they will actually suffer worse because they will make too much money to qualify for a lot of the extra benefits. If it's cold, and for example, right now, heating oil is over $5 a gallon. And if we're in the winter, they're not going to get heating assistance. They're not going to get electrical assistance. So they're going to have to give up a lot of things that are important to their quality of life. So we've got the politicians on both sides at all levels who are not worrying about the budget. They're worrying about having a drag show in the library, having a Haitian day in a city, or we can't have such and such a day because it's DEI. We're going to argue about whether a transgender person can go in the bathroom and stuff. Those things, while may be important, are all basically rearranging the chairs on the Titanic as it's sinking. The federal budget is sinking. It's a Titanic. Okay? It is going to affect the quality of life for about 200 million plus Americans. As inflation goes up, people lose their jobs. And this time around, you got companies invested all in AI. Okay, I was reading an article today. In Silicon Valley, you got all these highly educated people that were making way over six figures, and now they don't have a job. And it goes, Mega, who has Facebook, they're doing round-the-clock layoffs. Company after company are laying off people. So if I make $150,000, I have a home, I get laid off, I may not have much equity in the house, so I gotta sell the house because I can't afford to live it. I can't afford to go to Nordstrom's, I can't afford to do this. So I'm taking money out of the community. And so say it happens to Keene. CNS has been laying off a lot of people, okay? So a lot of them move out of town or they don't come back into Keene. They don't spend their money in Keene. What happens? Okay, Keene has got so expensive, families are not moving in because they can't afford to live in Keene, can't afford the quality of life, the standard they would like to. And so, Keene's population is going down. You get about 500 less kids in the high school. That all affects. And so now inflation goes up. Inflation goes up, so the school budget goes up, the city, the county budget goes up. As they go up, where's the money coming from? Of course, with the inflation, the federal government has to cut its budget. The federal government doesn't give as much money to the states. So the states can't give money to the communities. So, but if the state raises taxes because inflation is high, that means people spend less. So you're actually bringing in less taxes, or even if you're bringing in the same taxes, if inflation's running at 10%, hey, for every $1 million you bring in taxes, you've lost $100,000 in buying power. So we as the government have been faking it for the last 20 years. We've been going to wars, but we put it on the credit card. So we made deals, so we have big corporations and stuff that they make all kinds of profits and don't pay a single penny in federal income tax. We set it up so they don't have to pay benefits and all that, what we normally expect. So we quietly spend hundreds of billions of dollars on free and reduced lunch, food stamps, Medicaid, where the majority of that money should have been coming from these other major corporations paying into the federal government, or instead covering these basic benefits for their employees. So what's happening as inflation is going up, as we're going to wars, as we have this energy shock, and we have so much debt, we could easily have the repeat of the late 1970s and early 1980s, because the only way the federal government can get out of this unbelievably growing debt is through inflation, and it is high long-term inflation. And if the bottom 60 are barely surviving, it's going to suck for you really bad.